Hello and welcome back. In this video we're gonna start with the backend of our dice game, and let us start with simply creating the functions that we're gonna use whenever we run the button. So let me just run this one time, and as we can see we have the new game roll and hold, and we need to create functions for each one of them. So what we're gonna do is to simply start with the roll one. So I'm gonna go ahead and simply create, and I'm gonna do it right here. So we have the roll dice button, and whenever roll dice is clicked, we're gonna connect it to a function that is the maybe just roll the dice, and I think we're good. Now what we're gonna do is to start with using the function right here. So I'm gonna create a function, and this will be roll the dice, and we're gonna start with changing the parameters or the score that we have here and here according to the roll that we have. Now let's just take a moment and think about it. So whenever the user rolls this dice, we're gonna change the images of the dice, and we're gonna get random images from 1 to 6, show them here, and add them to whatever we have in the current right here. Alright, so to do that, what we're gonna need is to simply store these scores of each player. So I'm gonna create two arrays or two lists. The first one will be the player's score, and it will be of zeros. I'm gonna explain it in a minute. And the second one will be the player's current score, and it will be also instantiated to 0. Now I'm gonna add an index for the current player, and it will be the first player for now. Now these actually represent the parameters or the score that we have right here. Alright, so player's score represent the actual score of player 1 and player 2. So the player 1 will take index 0 and player 2 will have index 1. And player's current score is actually this one. So player 1, this is 0, it's this one, and player 2, it's this one. So let's go ahead and change them inside the labels that we have. Alright, so we do have Q labels for player 1 and player 2, and we also have for score 1 and score 2. So I'm gonna change this into player's score at 0 and player's score at 1. And we're gonna continue all the way till player 1 current score. It will be player's current score at 0, and we do have player's current score at 1. And that's it basically. Now we have changed the values into actual values. Now if we run this code, we're gonna notice that we're gonna have an error, and this is because we're simply using, let me just comment this out and run it again. And we're gonna get this error because the Q label takes a string, and we have assigned an integer instead of a string. So to just deal with that, I'm gonna add str here, and we're gonna do the exact same thing for this one right here. Now we're good to go. We have stored a string inside the Q label, and everything should work fine. Alright, so we do have one more, which is roll the dice, because we just created this function and we commented out. Now run, and we're good. So that's it basically. Now everything is as before. However, we changed the values from maybe static into dynamic that changes over time by changing the values right here in these lists. Now let's start with the roll the dice function. Now what we're gonna do at first is to just create die1, and this will be a random, and we're gonna just import random here. This is a Python library. Now random.randint, and we're gonna have random number between 1 and 6, and die2 will be the same randint between 1 and 6. Now what we're gonna do is to simply print these to just have an idea of these dice. Right, so dice are, and we're gonna add die1 and die2, and let's just visualize it. So I'm gonna have the method clicked and comment, right, and we're good to go. Let's click on it, and that's it. Now if I press on roll, we're gonna see that we do have random dice each time we press this button, and we're good to go. Now what we should do is to actually store these values inside whatever we have plus the original value that we have in the current. Alright, and this depends on the player. So for example, if player 1 is playing, we should add this into player's 1 current score, and we're gonna do the exact same thing for player 2. Now let's go back and start with this. So what we're gonna do is to simply check at first if one of the dice is equal to 1, then we're simply gonna break out of this function, because whenever we have a die equal to 1, this means that the person or the user has lost this round, and we're not gonna add anything into the final score. We're gonna simply reset the current score of this player. So let's go ahead and do it. So if die1 is equal to 1 or die2 is also equal to 1, what we're gonna do is to simply set the player's current score into 0. Alright, now let me explain this in a bit. What we actually did here is that we called the player's current score, and we do have in player's current score both the scores of player 1 and player 2. So in this one right here, as we said, we do have player 1, which is this one, and player 2, which is this one, and we're gonna set this into 0. So whatever current we have, whatever player we have from this current player, we're gonna simply set it to 0. And what we're gonna do then is to check if the current player is the player 1. And how do we do that? We're gonna check if current player is equal to 0. This means that it is the player 1, and we're gonna set the current score button or the current score label into 0. So to do that, we're gonna simply set player 1 current score dot set text, and we're gonna set it to 0. And we're gonna also change the player into player 2, because player 1 has lost, so current player will be of index 1 here. Now don't get confused with this, because current player is equal to 0, this means that this is player 1, and current player equal to 1 means that this is player 2, because we start at index 0. Now if this is not the case, what we're gonna do is to set the player 2 current score into 0, and we're gonna simply change the current player into 0 in this case. Now notice that we have maybe just an error here, because current player is not defined, and we do have this problem report undefined variable, and this is the current player, which is a global variable, and we need to define it if we want to change it or we want to use it right here. So to use it, we can simply write global and write the name of the variable, and we're good to go. Now as we can see, we solved the problem for whenever we have a die 1, we're gonna simply just set the current score of whatever player we have into 0, and then change it in the actual label that we have in PyQt5. And now what we can do is to continue our code or our function if we have no dice equal to 0. Alright, So now what we're gonna do is to simply change the pictures into the random dice that we have here. So we're gonna change image1 label, and we're gonna set pixmap into the new image. So we're gonna use qpixmap, and the image will be, we're gonna start with dice dash. We're gonna change the number to whatever we have in die1. So we're gonna write dice dash, then we're gonna add str die1, and then we're gonna add .png. So that's it basically. We need to also scale it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do it right here. So dot scaled, and we're good to go. We're gonna scale it into 80 by 80. And we're gonna do the exact same thing to image2, set pixmap, and it will be qpixmap, and we're gonna have dice dash plus str die2, and we're gonna add plus .png and dot scaled into 80 by 80. Alright, so now we have changed the pictures. Let me go ahead and run this again. So whenever we roll the die, we can see that the images are changing. However, we have no values right here, either in the current score or the final score of the players. And we need to improve this or modify it. So now what we're gonna do is to check if the current player is player 1. And how do we do that? We can simply ask ourselves if current player is equal to 0. If this is the case, what we're gonna do is to set the current score of player 1 into whatever we have inside this current score plus these die right here. Alright, so let's do that. If player 1 is playing, then player 1 current score dot set text, and we're gonna set it into the string of, we're gonna have the player 1 current score, which is actually a string, and we're gonna just add to it these die1 and die2. So remember that player 1 dot current score is a string. So if I extract it, player 1 dot current score dot get, dot text. So if I get this and I try to add die1 and die2 to it, we're gonna get an error because we can't just get this plus these. We need to either concatenate them as a string, or we need to convert this into an integer. And to do that, I'm gonna simply add int here, and we're good to go. So if I try to run this, we're gonna run into another problem, which is we can't add an integer to the text here. So we need to convert all of these into a string. And now we're good to go. After that, what we can actually do is to also add the die1 and die2 into the list that we have. So remember that we are at player 1. What we can actually do is to simply add to player's current score at the current player that we have. We're gonna add to it the die1 plus die2. So that's it basically. Now what we can actually do is to check if this is not the case. We're gonna simply do the exact same thing to the second player. So set text str, and we're gonna get player2 dot current score dot text, and we're gonna add to it die1 plus die2. Alright, so I think we're good to go for now. We just need to simply add this. I'm gonna current, or we can, because this is the same for both of these, what we can actually do is to add it right here. So instead of typing it 2 times, I'm gonna just take it and use it right here. Alright, so I think we're good to go. Let me just adjust this, and that's it basically for the roll the dice. In the next video, we're gonna try it out and start with the next function. So see you then.